Elena Vasquez stared at the jeering crowd, her weathered aviator jacket pulled tight against the biting mountain wind. They mocked her once magnificent Bell 205 helicopter, now patched with mismatched panels and faded paint. What they didn't know was that when disaster struck, her flying junkyard would be their only salvation in a race against death. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ancient Bell 205 helicopter sat like a forgotten relic on the outer edge of Summit Ridge Outpost, its faded olive green paint peeling in strips that curled like autumn leaves. The rotor blades, though meticulously balanced, were mismatched, one gleaming new, 3 others patched and repainted so many times the original color was a mystery. Elena Vasquez ran her hand along the fuselage, fingers tracing the patchwork of repairs she'd made over the years, each one a story of survival and stubborn determination. The morning sun cast long shadows across the landing pad as she completed her pre-flight check, the same ritual she'd performed for 15 years. Regardless of who was watching or what they thought, Summit Ridge Outpost stood proudly against the backdrop of the Cascade Mountains, a modern marvel of glass and steel that housed the Western Regional Emergency Response Training Center. Its gleaming buildings reflected the surrounding pines and snow-capped peaks, a stark contrast to Elena's helicopter that seemed to belong to another era entirely. The facility buzzed with the activity of the elite mountain rescue teams who trained there, their matching red and black uniforms moving with practiced precision between the state-of-the-art training facilities. Elena tightened her well-worn boots and adjusted the collar of her faded flight jacket, the patches from her years of service barely clinging to the worn fabric. Unlike the sleek, matching gear of the Summit Ridge personnel, her clothing told the story of years in the field. Practical, tested, and indifferent to appearance. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, her olive skin weathered from years of high-altitude flights and mountain rescues that no one at this facility knew about or would believe. She had arrived at Summit Ridge 3 weeks ago with minimal explanation and a digital transfer authorization that raised eyebrows but was reluctantly processed. The official story was that she'd been brought in as a consulting flight mechanic to assist with helicopter maintenance training. The truth was more complicated. A bureaucratic error had placed her here instead of at the Northern Command outpost where her specific expertise in high-altitude rescues was actually needed. By the time the mistake was discovered, budget freezes had locked personnel transfers for at least 2 months. Elena could have fought it, demanded reassignment, but curiosity had gotten the better of her. Summit Ridge had a reputation, the best equipment, the most advanced training protocols, and a troubling pattern of rescue failures in certain extreme conditions. She wanted to see for herself what the disconnect was between their impressive resources and their occasional catastrophic failures. Civilian contractors are required to use the east entrance, a voice called out as Elena finished her inspection. She turned to see a tall man in a crisp instructor uniform, his name badge, reading Director Carson Walsh. His perfectly trimmed beard and immaculate appearance matched the pristine helicopter behind him, a latest model Airbus H-16, with the Summit Ridge logo emblazoned on its side. "I'm not a contractor," Elena replied simply, continuing her check of the tail rotor. "Transfer assignment, flight operation support." Walsh looked at her helicopter with undisguised disdain. "That museum piece isn't cleared for our airspace. You'll need to move it to the storage hangar until you arrange transport out." He gestured toward a distant building, clearly used for equipment no one wanted visible from the main complex. Elena nodded but said nothing, making a note in her worn logbook without looking up. Walsh waited for an argument that never came, then shook his head and walked away, already dismissing her from his thoughts. The next morning, Elena slipped into the back of the main briefing room where the rescue teams were reviewing protocols for winter storm operations. The walls were lined with high-resolution screens displaying weather patterns, topographical maps, and equipment specifications. In the center of the room stood Meera Patel, Summit Ridge's star pilot and training lead, pointing to simulated wind patterns with confidence that commanded the room's attention. When approaching a ridgeline in Category 3 conditions, maintain a minimum clearance of 300 feet to account for unexpected turbulence and downdrafts, Patel explained, her voice clear and authoritative. The trainees nodded, taking notes on sleek tablets. Elena noticed a flaw in the simulation. The wind patterns shown didn't account for the compression effect that occurred between narrowing ridgelines, something that had caused numerous accidents in real-world scenarios. Her hand rose almost automatically. The compression ratio in that canyon would intensify those downdrafts by at least 40%, she said quietly from the back. You'd need double that clearance in actual conditions. The room fell silent, heads turning toward the unfamiliar voice. Meera Patel's expression froze somewhere between surprise and irritation. "And you are?" she asked, her tone making it clear that interruptions weren't welcome. "Elena Vasquez, Flight Operations." A trainee in the front row snickered. "Isn't she the one with the junk helicopter? Maybe she's worried about parts falling off if she gets too close to the mountains." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Laughter rippled through the room. Meera Patel's lips twitched with a suppressed smile, but she quickly regained her professional demeanor. "Our simulations are calibrated using the latest NOAA data and Summit Ridge field testing," she said dismissively. "Let's continue with the protocol review." Elena made no effort to argue further. Instead, she opened her notebook and made detailed observations about the training gaps she was witnessing. The dismissal didn't bother her. She'd faced far worse in her career. What concerned her was the confidence with which they were teaching potentially deadly misconceptions. Later that day, as Elena was checking the weather seals on her helicopter's doors, a group of trainees in their pristine flight suits sauntered toward the main hangar for simulator practice. At their center was Ryan Blackwood, son of the renowned General Blackwood who had helped establish Summit Ridge years ago. Ryan carried himself with the entitled confidence of someone who believed his name guaranteed his success. As they passed Elena's helicopter, Ryan veered toward her, a smirk playing on his lips. "Didn't they retire these models before I was born?" he called out, drawing laughs from his companions. "I'm pretty sure I've seen better-looking helicopters in war museums." Elena continued working, her focus unwavering as she tested the tension on a control cable. Emboldened by her silence, Ryan stepped closer, running a hand along the helicopter's side. "What's holding it together? Duct tape and prayers?" He flicked a patch of mismatched paint with his finger. "I wouldn't trust this thing to hover 3 feet off the ground, let alone perform an actual rescue." Elena finally looked up, her dark eyes calm. "It flies," she said simply, then returned to her work. Annoyed by her lack of reaction, Ryan pulled out his phone and gestured to his friends. "Everyone get in for a selfie with the flying trash hoop," he announced, positioning himself in front of the helicopter. "This'll be perfect for the group chat. Vintage Aviation Day at Summit Ridge." Phones appeared, cameras clicking as they posed mockingly in front of her aircraft. Elena stood to the side, watching them with a patient expression that held neither anger nor embarrassment, just quiet observation. They didn't understand what they were looking at, not just a helicopter, but a machine that had saved lives. In conditions their simulators couldn't even accurately model. That evening, Director Walsh called Elena to his office. The space was immaculate, walls adorned with certificates, awards, and photos of Walsh with various government officials. He gestured for her to sit while he remained standing, reinforcing the power dynamic. "Ms. Vasquez," he began, consulting a tablet, "there seems to be some confusion about your role here." Your transfer paperwork lists you as flight operations support, but you don't have Summit Ridge certification for any of our aircraft. No, sir, I don't, Elena agreed. Furthermore, he paused, searching for a diplomatic term. Vintage aircraft you arrived in doesn't meet our facility standards. I've approved emergency maintenance access so you can prepare it for transport elsewhere, but you won't be participating in any flight operations or training here. Elena met his gaze steadily. I understand. Instead, you'll be assisting with inventory management and equipment maintenance documentation until your transfer period is complete or alternate arrangements can be made. He slid a tablet across the desk. Your access has been limited to ground support areas only. The simulator wing and flight planning centers are restricted. Elena took the tablet without comment, noting the red access restrictions that now dominated her facility map. She'd expected this, had even counted on it. Sometimes being underestimated created the perfect opportunity to observe unnoticed. That will be all, Walsh concluded, already turning his attention back to his computer screen. As Elena left the office, she passed a wall of photographs showing Summit Ridge's gleaming helicopter fleet performing various maneuvers against spectacular mountain backdrops. The images were impressive, perfectly composed to showcase both the aircraft and the dramatic landscape. What they didn't show were the realities of mountain rescue, the unpredictable weather, the mechanical challenges at altitude, the split-second decisions that couldn't be programmed into any simulator. Over the following days, Elena established a routine that made her nearly invisible to the Summit Ridge personnel. She arrived before dawn, performed maintenance on her helicopter, then moved through the facility with quiet efficiency, completing the mundane tasks assigned to her while observing everything around her. She ate alone in the corner of the cafeteria, a small notebook always open beside her tray, her pen moving constantly as she recorded observations, calculations, and patterns that no one bothered to ask about. The elite rescue teams had little interest in the quiet woman in the worn flight jacket who organized supply closets and updated maintenance logs. They passed her in hallways without acknowledgement, their conversations dropping to whispers or halting entirely when she appeared, then resuming once she was gone. To them, she was a bureaucratic mistake that would eventually be corrected, not worth their attention or respect. What they didn't see was how Elena positioned herself near observation windows during simulator training, noting the mistakes that instructors missed or dismissed. They didn't notice how she studied the weather patterns on monitoring stations, when no one was watching, comparing them to her own records and calculations. They certainly didn't realize that every evening, after most personnel had left for the day, she meticulously reviewed rescue operation logs, identifying patterns of success and failure that told a story no one at Summit Ridge seemed willing to acknowledge. In her small assigned quarters at the edge of the facility, Elena maintained a detailed map of the surrounding mountain range, marking hazardous areas that Summit Ridge's training programs consistently misunderstood or underestimated. Each night, she updated her notes, adding new observations and refining her understanding of both the terrain and the operational flaws she was witnessing. One afternoon, as Elena was inventorying emergency medical supplies in a storage room, she overheard Ryan Blackwood and his friends in the adjacent locker room, their voices carrying through the thin wall. "Did you see her at lunch today?" one of them asked. "Writing in that little notebook like she's gathering intelligence." "Maybe she's an undercover journalist," another suggested with a laugh. "Doing an expose on helicopters of the last century. My father says she filed for a transfer review," Ryan's voice added. "Apparently she's claiming she has some special high-altitude rescue certification that Summit Ridge needs. As if we don't already have the best pilots and equipment in the country. Did you see that helicopter this morning? I swear there's a new patch on the tail section. It's like watching someone put Band-Aids on a corpse." Their laughter faded as they moved deeper into the facility, unaware that Elena had heard every word. She continued her inventory, her expression unchanged. Their mockery wasn't important. What mattered was the work, the preparation, and the knowledge that she was gathering. Summit Ridge might have the newest equipment and the most expensive training programs, but they had critical blind spots that could cost lives when it mattered most. At the edge of the facility, Elena's helicopter sat apart from the gleaming fleet, its weathered exterior a stark contrast to their polished perfection. But beneath its rough appearance lay systems that had been modified and improved through years of actual mountain rescues, each adaptation born from real-world experience rather than simulation. The trainees saw an outdated machine. Elena knew. It was one of the most reliable high-altitude rescue crafts in operation, regardless of its appearance. Every evening, after completing her assigned tasks, Elena would spend time with her helicopter, performing maintenance that went far beyond basic requirements. She checked systems that most pilots never thought about, made adjustments based on barometric readings and forecast conditions, and ensured that every component was functioning at optimal levels. Sometimes maintenance staff would pass by, casting curious or pitying glances at her dedicated work on what they considered a flying relic. "You're wasting your time," a young mechanic told her one evening. "They're never going to let that thing join a rescue operation here. Summit Ridge only uses current generation aircraft." Elena tightened a fitting with practiced precision. "I don't maintain it for Summit Ridge," she replied without looking up. "I maintain it because that's what you do with aircraft you depend on." The mechanic shook his head and walked away, missing the deeper truth in her words. Elena wasn't preparing her helicopter for Summit Ridge's approval. She was keeping it ready for the moment when it would be needed, regardless of anyone's permission or protocols. As weeks passed, Elena became adept at navigating Summit Ridge's social hierarchy without disturbing it. She learned which instructors were respected and which were merely tolerated, which trainees had genuine skill versus those who relied on connections, and which administrators actually understood mountain rescue versus those who only understood budgets and procedures. She recorded it all in her notebook, not as gossip, but as essential information about the human factors that would influence any real emergency response. During a rare moment when the simulator wing was unmanned, Elena slipped inside and reviewed the program scenarios. As she suspected, many of them underestimated key factors: wind shear near cliff faces, visibility degradation in certain snow conditions, and the effects of rapid temperature changes on aircraft performance. These weren't minor oversights, they were potentially fatal flaws in training that could lead pilots to make disastrous decisions in real conditions. She was making notes on these discrepancies when Meera Patel entered the room, stopping short at the sight of Elena at the controls. "This area is restricted," Patel said sharply. "How did you get access?" Elena closed her notebook calmly. "The door was open for maintenance." Patel's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be reviewing these programs. They're proprietary Summit Ridge training scenarios." "They're also incomplete," Elena replied, standing to leave. "The turbulence models for narrow canyons don't account for seasonal variation or snow load impact." "Excuse me?" Patel's voice rose with indignation. "These scenarios were developed by our team based on years of collected data." "Collected, yes, but not experienced." Elena moved toward the door, then paused. "There's a difference between flying through data points and flying through an actual mountain storm." Patel blocked her path, anger flashing in her eyes. "And I suppose you and your ancient helicopter have more experience than our entire facility? Do you know how many successful rescues Summit Ridge has performed?" "I know how many you've failed," Elena answered quietly, "particularly in the North Quadrant during winter conditions." The color drained from Patel's face. "Those failures were rarely discussed openly at Summit Ridge, treated as anomalies rather than systemic issues. Who exactly are you?" she demanded. "Just flight operations support," Elena replied, echoing the dismissive classification she'd been given. "As you've all made very clear." She left Patel standing in the simulator room, staring after her with a mixture of anger and unsettling doubt. The encounter would likely lead to further restrictions on Elena's access, but she had already gathered most of the information she needed. The picture it painted was concerning. Summit Ridge was training its teams with flawed models based on incomplete understanding of the very mountains that surrounded them. That night, as Elena updated her weather tracking systems, she noted an approaching storm front that wasn't appearing on Summit Ridge's forecasts yet. The facility relied heavily on standard meteorological services, but Elena supplemented these with direct observations and custom tracking algorithms she developed over years of mountain flying. The data suggested a major system moving faster than predicted, with temperature gradients that would create dangerous conditions within 48 hours, precisely the type of scenario that Summit Ridge's training consistently misrepresented. She considered reporting her findings but knew they would likely be dismissed. Instead, she prepared her helicopter for potential harsh conditions, checked emergency supplies, and updated her terrain maps with the latest snowfall data. Summit Ridge might not value her knowledge, but she would remain ready regardless. The next morning, as Elena walked across the landing pad to begin her daily maintenance, she found Ryan Blackwood and 3 other trainees lounging against her helicopter, coffee cups in hand and smirks on their faces. "We heard you've been sneaking into restricted areas," Ryan called out. "Trying to steal some actual training to go with that museum piece." Elena approached steadily, her expression neutral. "Please step away from the aircraft." "Ah, afraid we'll damage your precious antique?" one of the others taunted. "Don't worry, we're trained professionals." He dramatically patted the helicopter's side, drawing laughs from his companions. Ryan pushed himself off the fuselage with deliberate force, causing the helicopter to rock slightly on its skids. "Oops, seems a little unstable. Maybe you should have it carbon dated before your next flight." Elena said nothing, simply waiting until they moved away from her aircraft. Their laughter echoed across the pad as they headed toward the main facility. Already forgetting her as they moved on to other topics, she carefully checked the area where they had been leaning, ensuring no damage had been done, then continued with her pre-flight inspection as if the interruption had never occurred. As she worked, Director Walsh approached, his expression stern. "Ms. Vasquez, I've received reports that you accessed the simulator wing without authorization yesterday." "The maintenance door was open," Elena replied, continuing her inspection. "That's not the point," Walsh said sharply. "You were reviewing and criticizing proprietary training scenarios you aren't cleared to evaluate. Furthermore, you've been observed recording notes throughout the facility without explanation." Elena straightened up, meeting his gaze directly. "Are personal notes restricted, Director Walsh?" "Don't be obtuse," he snapped. "Your assignment here was clearly outlined. Until your transfer situation is resolved, you are to stick to inventory and basic maintenance documentation. Any further violations will result in facility access restrictions." He handed her a new tablet with an updated access map that showed even more areas marked in red. "Your credentials have been modified accordingly. I suggest you focus on your assigned duties and leave the training evaluation to qualified personnel." As Walsh walked away, Elena noticed Mira Patel watching from the entrance to the main hangar, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, a moment of silent acknowledgement before Patel turned and disappeared into the building. Elena returned her attention to her helicopter, running her hands along the control linkages with practiced precision. The storm she had been tracking was approaching faster than Summit Ridge's systems were reporting, and she could feel the subtle pressure changes that preceded major weather events in the mountains. Something significant was coming, and she needed to be prepared, regardless of access restrictions or facility politics. As days passed at Summit Ridge, Elena settled into a rhythm of purposeful invisibility. She moved through the facility like a ghost, present yet unseen, gathering information that others deemed worthless while maintaining her helicopter with relentless dedication. Each morning before dawn, she would run complete systems checks, testing backup circuits and emergency protocols that hadn't been activated in months. The Summit Ridge staff had taken to calling her helicopter the fossil behind her back, a nickname that spread through the facility with mocking affection. During her third week, Elena noticed Ryan Blackwood filming her pre-flight routine, narrating with exaggerated commentary for his friends. And here we see a rare specimen of aviation, history being prepared for its journey to the Smithsonian. Note the ancient analog gauges and the prehistoric rotor assembly, carefully maintained using techniques passed down from the Wright brothers themselves. Elena didn't acknowledge them, focusing instead on the approaching weather system that continued to develop more rapidly than Summit Ridge's forecasts predicted. The facility's meteorological team had finally noticed the anomaly that morning, but their models still underestimated its severity by a significant margin. Elena had seen this pattern before in the Cascades, rapidly forming pressure systems that intensified when trapped between mountain ranges, creating conditions far more dangerous than standard models could predict. In the cafeteria that afternoon, Elena sat alone as usual, her notebook open beside her tray as she calculated fuel consumption rates under varying wind conditions. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter, the elite rescue teams discussing weekend plans and competing for status through tales of difficult maneuvers and challenging simulations. At the center table, Meera Patel held court, describing a complex rescue sequence she had programmed into the advanced simulator. The key is maintaining perfect balance between power and control inputs when you hit those crosswinds, Patel explained to the RAP trainees. Most pilots overcorrect and waste precious seconds stabilizing, but if you anticipate the shift pattern. Her voice trailed off as she noticed Elena watching from the corner. For a moment, their eyes met across the room, and something shifted in Patel's expression, not quite doubt, but perhaps the first hint of curiosity about the quiet woman, who kept to herself yet seemed to understand mountain flying at a fundamental level. The moment passed as Ryan Blackwood dropped into the seat beside Patel, drawing her attention back to the group. Speaking of difficult maneuvers, he announced loudly, glancing toward Elena's table. I heard maintenance is taking bets on whether the fossil will actually start tomorrow. Apparently, they found what they think is duct tape holding together part of the tail assembly. Laughter rippled through the table, though Patel's smile seemed forced. Elena closed her notebook, gathered her barely touched food, and left the cafeteria without reaction. Their mockery was irrelevant compared to the weather data she was tracking and the preparations she needed to complete. That evening, as most personnel headed to their quarters for the night, Elena made her way to the small maintenance office where weather reports were archived. Her access had been restricted from most systems, but the basic meteorological data was still available on the public terminals. She downloaded the latest satellite imagery and atmospheric readings, comparing them to her own calculations and historical patterns she had documented over years of mountain flying. The comparison confirmed her concerns. The approaching system had all the markers of a Category 5 mountain storm, but Summit Ridge's systems were still classifying it as a moderate weather event with minimal operational impact. The disconnect wasn't just a matter of different models. It reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of how weather systems interacted with the specific topography of the Cascade Range. As Elena studied the data, the door opened behind her. She turned to find Meera Patel standing in the doorway, arms crossed, expression guarded. It's after hours, Patel said, though her tone lacked the sharpness Elena had come to expect from Summit Ridge personnel. Just checking weather reports, Elena replied, turning back to the screen. Patel hesitated, then stepped into the room. "You think our forecast is wrong?" It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. "Yes." "Based on what?" Elena pulled up two images side by side, Summit Ridge's current forecast and a similar storm pattern from 3 years earlier. Pressure gradient is nearly identical. That system 3 years ago produced winds over 90 knots and dropped visibility to 0. Above 8,000 feet for nearly 36 hours. Patel studied the images, her professional skepticism warring with the evidence before her. That storm caught everyone by surprise. It was an anomaly. "It wasn't," Elena said quietly. "Mountain systems like this follow patterns that most models miss because they rely too heavily on generalized atmospheric data without accounting for terrain-specific influences. And you know better than our meteorological team with their combined 60 years of experience." Elena closed the files and stood to leave. Experience doesn't always equal understanding. Sometimes it just reinforces comfortable misconceptions. She moved toward the door, but Patel didn't step aside. "Who are you really?" Patel asked, her voice low. "Your transfer paperwork is practically blank. You fly a helicopter that belongs in a museum. And you keep notes on everything like you're conducting some kind of evaluation." Elena met her gaze steadily. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I've been flying mountain rescue operations for 15 years. The rest doesn't matter right now because in approximately 18 hours, this facility is going to face weather conditions it isn't prepared for." Patel's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing genuine concern beneath. "If you have relevant information about potential weather hazards, you should report it officially." "To whom?" "Director Walsh, who restricted my access because I questioned your simulator parameters." "Or perhaps the meteorological team that has consistently underestimated similar systems in the past." Elena shook her head. "They'll see it when it arrives. I just hope it won't be too late." This time when Elena moved to leave, Patel stepped aside, watching thoughtfully as the mysterious woman disappeared down the corridor. Something about Elena's quiet certainty was more convincing than any forceful argument could have been. Through the night, Elena monitored the approaching storm from her quarters, tracking its development with growing concern. By dawn, the system had intensified beyond even her predictions, a massive convergence of cold fronts and moisture that would hit the mountains with devastating force. She dressed quickly and headed to her helicopter, intending to secure additional tie-downs before the winds arrived. As she crossed the landing pad, she noticed increased activity around the main facility, personnel moving with urgent purpose, vehicles being relocated to covered areas, equipment being secured. Summit Ridge had finally recognized the threat, though their response still seemed calibrated to a less severe scenario than what was actually approaching. Elena had just finished attaching the last reinforced tie-down when Director Walsh appeared on the pad, accompanied by 2 senior staff members. His face was tight with controlled stress as he approached. "Ms. Vasquez," he called out over the strengthening wind. "We're implementing emergency protocols due to an unexpected weather system. All non-essential personnel are being relocated to the secure wing." Elena nodded, securing her tools in their weatherproof case. "The storm will hit the North Ridge first. You should expect the first severe gusts within 3 hours." Walsh's eyes narrowed. "Our meteorological team has this under control. Please report to the secure wing immediately for the duration of the weather event." "My helicopter needs additional securing," Elena replied. "I'll join you when that's complete." Walsh looked like he wanted to argue but was pulled away by an urgent call on his radio. The activity around the facility was intensifying, with teams rushing to implement protocols that should have been initiated hours earlier. Elena watched for a moment, then returned to her preparations, checking and double-checking every system on her helicopter, even as the sky darkened ominously above the mountains. By mid-morning, the storm hit with a ferocity that caught Summit Ridge off guard despite the warnings. Wind screamed across the landing pad at speeds approaching 85 knots, driving sheets of snow and ice against buildings and vehicles with brutal force. The temperature plummeted, turning exposed surfaces into hazardous sheets of ice within minutes. From the Secure Operations Center, Elena watched as Summit Ridge's emergency team struggled to adapt to conditions far worse than their preparations had anticipated. Communication systems designed for moderate weather were failing under the extreme conditions, and several external sensor arrays had already been damaged by flying debris. The room was filled with controlled chaos, officers issuing orders, technicians attempting to restore failed systems, and meteorologists staring in disbelief at readings that exceeded their model's parameters. In the center of it all stood Director Walsh, his earlier confidence replaced by grim determination as he coordinated the facility's response. "Primary communication relays are down," a technician reported. "Backup systems are operating at 60%. Capacity and degrading. External power is fluctuating," another called out. "Switching to internal generators." Walsh turned to the meteorological team. "How long before conditions improve?" The lead meteorologist shook his head, looking stunned. "This isn't following any standard pattern. We're looking at sustained Category 5 conditions for at least 24 hours, possibly longer." "That wasn't in your forecast this morning," Walsh snapped. "It wasn't in anyone's forecast," the meteorologist defended. "This system intensified at an unprecedented rate." Elena, standing quietly near the back wall, said nothing. She had seen this pattern before, had tried to warn them, but Summit Ridge's confidence in their advanced systems had blinded them to the knowledge that came from years of actual mountain flying. The emergency radio crackled suddenly, a broken transmission cutting through the room's tension. "Repeat. Emergency. Stranded. North face." The communications officer adjusted frequencies, trying to clarify the transmission. "This is Summit Ridge Command. Please repeat your emergency." Through static and wind noise, a desperate voice fought to be heard. 4 climbers. Trapped. Avalanche risk. Hypothermia. Coordinates. The transmission faded in and out as the storm interfered with the signal, but enough came through to understand the situation. A group of experienced climbers had been caught by the storm on the north face of Mount Rainier. Their emergency shelter had been damaged, leaving them exposed to temperatures that would be fatal within hours. They needed immediate evacuation. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. 4 lives hung in the balance, dependent on a rescue that would have to happen in conditions that exceeded safety parameters for every aircraft in Summit Ridge's fleet. Director Walsh was the first to recover. "Get me status reports on all rescue-capable aircraft," he ordered. "I need to know what we have that might be operational in these conditions." The reports came back quickly, and none were promising. The facility's primary rescue helicopters, the latest Airbus models with advanced stabilization systems, were rated for severe weather, but not the extreme conditions currently raging outside. The combination of wind speeds, visibility, and icing conditions placed the mission well outside their operational parameters. Meera Patel, who had been analyzing the climbers' coordinates, looked up grimly. "They're in a position with extreme downdrafts and turbulence. Even if we could get an aircraft there, the approach would be nearly impossible in these conditions." "What about ground rescue?" Walsh asked. The terrain specialist shook his head. "Not possible. The avalanche risk is too high, and the time frame is too short. Those climbers have 3 hours at most before hypothermia becomes fatal. So we do nothing?" Patel demanded, her professional composure cracking. "We just let them die?" Walsh's face was a mask of controlled anguish, the face of a man who understood both his responsibility to save lives and his duty not to risk additional lives unnecessarily. "I need options, people. Realistic options." Elena stepped forward from the back of the room, her quiet movement drawing all eyes. "The Bell can fly in these conditions," she said simply. The statement hung in the air for a moment before Ryan Blackwood, who had been monitoring communications, gave a short, incredulous laugh. "The fossil? You can't be serious. That thing belongs in a museum, not a Category 5 storm." "That thing has been modified specifically for extreme mountain conditions," Elena replied evenly. "Reinforced rotor assembly, custom anti-icing system, and stabilization controls designed for severe turbulence." Walsh studied her with new attention. "You're saying you can reach those climbers in this storm?" "Yes, impossible," the lead meteorologist interjected. "No helicopter could safely navigate the conditions on that face right now. No standard helicopter." Elena agreed. "But mine isn't standard. It's been adapted based on years of actual mountain rescues in conditions just like these." Patel stepped closer, her earlier skepticism replaced by desperate hope. "You've flown rescues in conditions this severe before?" "Many times." The room fell silent again as the implications of her claim sank in. The woman they had dismissed, whose helicopter they had mocked, might be the only chance those climbers had for survival. Walsh broke the silence, his decision already forming in his eyes. "What would you need for this mission?" "Current coordinates, emergency medical supplies, and someone who knows basic field trauma care to assist with extraction," Elena answered without hesitation. "I'll go," Patel volunteered immediately. "I'm certified in emergency medicine." Walsh nodded slowly, the weight of the decision visible in his expression. "Ms. Vasquez, I need to be absolutely clear. You believe you can safely reach those climbers and return in these conditions?" "Not safely," Elena corrected. "There's nothing safe about flying in this storm. But I can reach them and bring them back." Ryan Blackwood pushed forward, his face flushed with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "This is insane. That helicopter is older than anyone in this room. The structural integrity alone is sound." Elena cut him off. "Every component has been maintained or upgraded to exceed original specifications." Director Walsh, Ryan appealed. "You can't seriously be considering this. It's suicide." Walsh looked from Ryan to Elena, then at the meteorological displays showing the relentless storm surrounding them. The radio crackled again with another broken transmission. From the stranded climbers, their situation deteriorating by the minute. "Ms. Vasquez," he said finally, "prepare your aircraft. This is a volunteer mission only. I cannot order anyone to accompany you in these conditions." "I'm still going," Patel stated firmly. Elena nodded once, then turned toward the door. "We leave in 15 minutes. The conditions won't improve, and those climbers don't have time to wait for a perfect solution." As she walked from the operations center, she heard Ryan's voice rising in continued protest, but it faded behind her as she focused on the mission ahead. The mockery and dismissal she had endured at Summit Ridge no longer mattered, only the lives that now depended on her skill and her much-derided helicopter. On the landing pad, the storm raged with unrelenting fury. Wind-driven snow reduced visibility to mere meters, and ice formed on exposed surfaces within seconds. Elena moved with practiced efficiency, removing the tie-downs and conducting a rapid but thorough pre-flight check of every critical system. Meera Patel emerged from the facility dressed in full cold-weather rescue gear, her face set with determined focus as she fought her way across the pad against the howling wind. Behind her came a medical technician carrying sealed emergency packs. "Last chance to reconsider," Elena called over the wind as Patel reached the helicopter. "Those people need help," Patel replied simply. "Let's go." They loaded the medical supplies and secured them in the cabin. Elena performed one final exterior check, then climbed into the pilot's seat. The interior of the Bell 205 was a stark contrast to Summit Ridge's modern aircraft. Analog gauges dominated the console, supplemented by custom digital displays that monitored the specialized systems Elena had installed over the years. Patel settled into the co-pilot seat, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the unique configuration. "I've never seen a control layout like this. Custom modifications," Elena explained, beginning the start sequence. "Designed for specific mountain conditions that standard configurations can't handle." The engines roared to life, the sound powerful and surprisingly smooth for a helicopter of its age. Elena watched the gauges carefully, confirming that every system was responding correctly before increasing power to the main rotor. Outside, a small group had gathered at the facility entrance, Walsh, Ryan, and several others watching with expressions ranging from hope to open skepticism. Ryan's face was particularly striking, a complex mixture of disbelief, worry, and perhaps the first hint of respect as he witnessed Elena's calm professionalism in the face of conditions that had grounded Summit Ridge's entire fleet. The Bell 205 lifted off the pad with surprising grace, hovering steadily despite the gusting winds that threatened to push it off balance. Elena's hands moved with practiced precision across the controls, making constant micro-adjustments that kept the aircraft stable as they rose into the heart of the storm. "Summit Ridge, this is Rescue 1, she radioed. "We are airborne and proceeding to target coordinates." "Copy Rescue 1, Walsh's voice replied, strained with tension. "Be advised conditions are deteriorating. Wind speeds now exceeding 90 knots at higher elevations." "Acknowledged," Elena responded calmly. "Maintain communication relay for stranded climbers." As they cleared the relative shelter of the Summit Ridge compound, the full force of the storm hit them. The helicopter bucked violently as crosswinds slammed into the fuselage, and visibility dropped to almost nothing in the swirling snow. Patel gripped her seat, knuckles white, as the aircraft seemed to fight against impossible conditions. Yet, through it all, Elena remained eerily calm, her hands dancing across the controls with intuitive precision that came from years of flying in conditions most pilots never experienced. Where Summit Ridge's advanced aircraft would have relied on computerized stabilization systems that would fail in such extreme turbulence, Elena's modified Bell responded directly to her commands, each movement a conversation between pilot and machine honed through countless hours of actual mountain flying. "How can you even see where we're going?" Patel shouted over the roar of the engines and howling wind. Elena gestured to a custom display mounted beside the traditional instruments. "Terrain mapping system. Uses multiple sensors to create a real-time topographical model even when visual references are obscured." The display showed a ghostly outline of the mountain ranges ahead of them, highlighting dangerous terrain features and indicating the safest path through the storm. It wasn't as sleek as Summit Ridge's advanced navigation systems, but it was specifically designed for the one thing that mattered most in these conditions: survival. As they pushed deeper into the storm, flying a route that no conventional helicopter would attempt, Patel's initial fear gave way to a different emotion: awe. She watched Elena navigate conditions that Summit Ridge's simulators classified as unsurvivable with a calm confidence that bordered on supernatural. The helicopter that had been mocked as a fossil, a museum piece, a flying junkyard, was now their only lifeline, and it was performing beyond anything Patel had thought possible. "You've done this before," Patel said, the realization finally sinking in completely. "This isn't your first extreme rescue." Elena's eyes remained focused on her instruments, hands never pausing in their constant adjustments. "No, before the bureaucratic mistake that sent me to Summit Ridge, I flew with the Northern Mountain Special Rescue Division. We specialized in the missions no one else would take." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" A slight smile touched Elena's lips. Would it have mattered? Summit Ridge values its advanced systems and theoretical models. Experience doesn't count for much when it contradicts the simulators. Patel had no answer for that. She turned her attention to the medical supplies, checking them once more as they neared the coordinates of the stranded climbers. The truth. In Elena's words stung. Summit Ridge had become so confident in its technology and methodology that it had closed itself off to other perspectives, other approaches, other kinds of wisdom. The radio crackled again, the stranded climber's voice now weaker, but filled with desperate hope as they responded to Walsh's relay that help was coming. Elena adjusted their course, descending toward a narrow ledge where the climbers had taken shelter beneath an overhanging rock face. There, Patel pointed through a momentary break in the swirling snow. I can see emergency reflectors. Elena nodded, already adjusting their approach. This will be a hover extraction. The ledge is too narrow and unstable for landing. I'll hold position while you secure the climbers for transport. In these winds, Patel looked stunned. How will you maintain a stable hover? The same way I got us here, Elena replied simply. One adjustment at a time. They descended slowly, fighting crosswinds that threatened to slam them into the mountain face with each gust. The helicopter shuddered and groaned under the strain, but Elena's modifications held firm, allowing her to maintain control where a standard aircraft would have been forced to retreat. As they approached the ledge, the true difficulty of the rescue became apparent. The climbers were huddled in a small hollow, partially protected from the wind, but dangerously exposed to the plummeting temperatures. The closest approach would still leave them nearly 10 meters from the helicopter, requiring a dangerous traverse across ice-covered rock and hurricane-force winds. We need to get closer, Patel shouted, seeing the impossible gap. Elena studied the terrain through the brief moments of visibility, then made a decision that would have been unthinkable in any flight manual or training program. Secure yourself. To the cabin. I'm going to rotate the tail and bring the side door directly adjacent to the ledge. Before Patel could protest the impossibility of such a maneuver in these conditions, Elena was already executing it, rotating the helicopter in a controlled pivot that brought the side door within 3 meters of the ledge while maintaining a stable hover mere feet from the sheer mountain face. Go now, Elena ordered, her complete focus on maintaining their precarious position, as wind gusts threatened to dash them against the rocks. Patel didn't hesitate. She secured a safety line, and with the help of the medical technician, began the dangerous process of extracting the stranded climbers. One by one, they brought the hypothermic injured climbers aboard, fighting against time and the relentless storm that seemed determined to claim them all. Throughout the extraction, Elena held the helicopter in a hover that defied everything. Summit Ridge's training had taught about aircraft limitations. The Bell 205 shuddered and strained against the elements, but it held firm, responding to Elena's commands with the loyalty of a machine that had been maintained, not just with technical skill, but with genuine care and understanding. Last climber was secured. Patel shouted, "All aboard! Let's go!" Elena nodded and began the delicate process of pulling away from the mountain face, every movement calculated to avoid the downdrafts and turbulence that could send them crashing into the rocks. The overladen helicopter protested the additional weight, but Elena had anticipated this, adjusting power and control inputs with the precision that came from having performed similar rescues dozens of times before. As they gained distance from the mountain and began their return journey to Summit Ridge, one of the climbers, barely conscious but aware enough to understand what had happened, looked around the cabin of the aged helicopter with wonder. "I thought we were dead," he whispered, when the storm hit. "We thought no one could reach us." Patel, administering emergency treatment to another climber, glanced toward Elena in the pilot's seat. "So did everyone else," she replied quietly. "Everyone except her." The return flight was a battle against conditions that had worsened during their rescue operation. Wind speeds had increased further, and the temperature continued to drop. creating severe icing conditions that tested even Elena's modified anti-icing systems. Yet she navigated through it all with the same calm precision, making continuous adjustments and using her intimate knowledge of mountain weather patterns to find the safest path through the storm. In the Summit Ridge Operations Center, tension had built to an almost unbearable level as they waited for any word from the rescue mission. Many had already written it off as a doomed attempt, a brave but futile gesture that would only add to the tragedy. Ryan Blackwood paced near the communications console, his earlier mockery forgotten as he listened intently for any transmission. When Elena's voice finally came through, announcing their successful extraction and impending return, the relief in the room was palpable. Walsh ordered immediate preparation for medical treatment of the climbers, his voice steady but his eyes revealing the emotional impact of the unexpected success. Ryan stopped his pacing, staring at the radio as if it might explain how the helicopter he had ridiculed had accomplished what Summit Ridge's advanced fleet could not. There was something in his expression beyond surprise, a dawning recognition that perhaps there was more to flying, to rescue, to courage than the simulators and theoretical models could teach. As Elena guided the Bell 205 back towards Summit Ridge, fighting the storm every meter of the way, she felt no triumph, no vindication, only the focused determination to complete the mission successfully. The mockery she had endured, the dismissal of her experience and her aircraft, none of it mattered compared to the lives now depending on her to bring them home safely. The landing pad came into view through a momentary break in the snow, Summit Ridge's buildings outlined against the storm like a fortress under siege. Emergency teams waited near the entrance, ready to receive the injured climbers as soon as the helicopter touched down. "Summit Ridge, this is Rescue 1, Elena radioed. Visual contact established. Approaching for landing with 4 critical patients aboard. Copy Rescue 1, Walsh's voice replied, emotion bleeding through his professional tone. You are cleared for immediate approach. Emergency team standing by. Elena brought the helicopter down through gusting crosswinds that would have overwhelmed less experienced pilots, maintaining perfect control until the skids touched the pad with a gentleness that belied the violence of the storm around them. The moment they were down, medical teams rushed forward, extracting the climbers and rushing them toward the facility's advanced medical wing. As the last patient was removed, Elena performed a complete shutdown sequence, her movements methodical even after the incredible stress of the mission. Only when every system was properly secured did she remove her helmet and exit the aircraft into the howling storm. The helicopter that had been mocked as obsolete, as a relic, as a flying junkyard, sat proudly on the pad, battered by the elements but unbowed, having accomplished what no other aircraft at Summit Ridge could have attempted. Its mismatched panels and patched fuselage now seemed less like signs of age and more like badges of honor, each repair telling the story of a mission completed, lives saved, impossible conditions conquered. On the edge of the pad stood Ryan Blackwood, watching as Elena walked away from her helicopter toward the facility entrance. His expression was complicated, humbled, certainly, but also struggling with a realization that challenged everything. He had been taught about what mattered in aviation, in rescue work, in courage. As Elena passed him, he stepped forward. I was wrong, he said simply, raising his voice to be heard over the wind. Elena paused, meeting his gaze for a moment. She could have responded with satisfaction, with vindication, with the sharp edge of justified resentment. Instead, she simply nodded once, acknowledging his words without needing to twist the knife of his humiliation, then continued toward the building where the rescued climbers were receiving treatment. Because for Elena Vasquez, it had never been about proving others wrong. It had been about doing what was right, about using her skills and her faithful helicopter to save lives when nothing else could. The mockery, the dismissal, the underestimation, they were just noise in the wind, forgotten the moment real work needed to be done. And as she walked through the doors of Summit Ridge, followed by the respect-filled gazes of those who had once laughed at her and her rusty helicopter, she carried with her the quiet certainty that some lessons can only be learned through experience, through failure, through humility, and that sometimes salvation comes not from the newest technology or the most advanced systems, but from the weathered hands and determined heart of someone who simply refuses to accept that some things are impossible. Inside the medical wing of Summit Ridge, controlled chaos reigned as doctors and emergency personnel worked to stabilize the 4 rescued climbers. Their core temperatures had dropped dangerously low, and 2 suffered from severe frostbite that threatened their fingers and toes. Yet beneath the urgent medical activity ran an undercurrent of amazement, not just that these people had been rescued, but how the rescue had been accomplished. Elena stood quietly in the corner of the observation room, watching through the glass as the medical team worked. Her flight suit was still crusted with ice from the mission, her face bearing the red marks left by her helmet straps during the punishing flight. She showed no signs of the exhaustion that should have followed such an ordeal, only calm attentiveness as she monitored the climber's treatment. Director Walsh entered the room, his normally perfect appearance now disheveled from hours in the crisis center. He paused in the doorway, observing Elena for a moment before approaching. The authority in his posture had shifted, tempered now by something that looked remarkably like respect. "The medical team says all 4 will survive," he said, coming to stand beside her at the window. The lead doctor called it a miracle they were extracted in these conditions. Elena nodded slightly but offered no response. Walsh cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with what he needed to say next. "I've reviewed your actual personnel file, the unredacted version." He paused, watching her face for a reaction that didn't come. 15 years with Northern Mountain Special Rescue, over 200 high-risk extractions, 3 presidential citations for exceptional bravery. Another pause. "Why didn't you tell us?" Elena finally turned to look at him, her dark eyes calm but penetrating. Would it have mattered? Summit Ridge values its technology, its systems, its methodologies. My experience contradicted your simulators, so it would have been dismissed, regardless of what was in my file. The truth of her words hung in the air between them, uncomfortable but undeniable. Summit Ridge had become so invested in its advanced technology and theoretical models that it had lost touch with the practical wisdom that came from actual experience in the mountains. "The bureaucratic error that sent you here," Walsh said. Slowly. "It wasn't an error at all, was it?" A ghost of a smile touched Elena's lips. "Northern Command has been concerned about Summit Ridge's training gaps for some time. Your rescue failure rate in certain conditions was becoming a liability. Someone needed to evaluate the situation from the inside." Walsh absorbed this with remarkable composure, though his jaw tightened slightly. "So you've been assessing us all along?" "The notebook, the observations." "Yes. And your conclusions?" Elena looked back through the window at the rescued climbers. "Summit Ridge has exceptional resources, dedicated personnel, and advanced technology. What it lacks is humility, the understanding that sometimes experience contradicts theory, and when that happens, experience should win." Walsh was silent for a long moment, his expression shifting as he processed her assessment. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its defensive edge. "The storm is forecast to intensify further overnight. We still have 3 research teams in the field who are due to return tomorrow. With communications degraded, we can't confirm their status." Elena understood immediately what he wasn't quite asking. "My helicopter will be ready after standard maintenance checks. Fuel, systems diagnostics, de-icing. 3 hours at most." Relief flickered across Walsh's face. "I'll have Patel prepare contingency extraction plans for each team's last known coordinates." "I'll need detailed terrain maps for those areas," Elena replied. "And your most experienced paramedic as Co-pilot. Walsh nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Ms. Vasquez, I apologize for how you were received here. Elena met his gaze steadily. Apologies matter less than change, Director Walsh. The question is whether Summit Ridge will learn from this, or return to comfortable assumptions once the crisis passes. He didn't answer, perhaps because he didn't yet know the answer himself. With a final nod, he left to make preparations for the potential rescue operations ahead. As night fell, the storm reached a ferocity that tested even Summit Ridge's reinforced structures. Windows vibrated under the assault of hurricane-force winds, and the temperature outside plummeted to levels that would cause exposed skin to freeze in minutes. The power fluctuated repeatedly as ice formed on the backup generators, requiring maintenance teams to venture out in survival gear to clear critical components. In the main hangar, Elena worked methodically on her helicopter, performing the necessary maintenance with practiced efficiency, despite the biting cold that penetrated even the insulated building. The hangar's massive doors rattled against their reinforced frames as wind gusts hammered the facility, creating a constant backdrop of noise that would have distracted a less focused individual. She was checking the transmission fluid levels when footsteps approached from behind. Turning, she found Ryan Blackwood standing awkwardly a few meters away, holding a steaming mug in each hand. "Maintenance said you refused to leave for dinner," he said, extending one of the mugs toward her. "Thought you might need this." Elena accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks, noting the change in his demeanor. Gone was the entitled arrogance that had defined him before, replaced by a subdued thoughtfulness that seemed foreign to his personality. "The Bell's transmission needs checking after extreme weather operations," she explained, though no explanation had been requested. "Standard procedure." Ryan nodded, his eyes moving over the helicopter with new appreciation. "Nothing about what you did today was standard." He hesitated, then continued with unexpected sincerity. "I've been flying simulators since I was 14. My father made sure I had access to the best training, the most advanced systems. I thought I knew what it meant to be a rescue pilot." He looked down at his coffee. "I didn't know anything." Elena continued her maintenance checks, neither encouraging nor discouraging his introspection. "How did you learn to fly like that?" he asked finally. "It wasn't in any manual or simulator I've ever seen." Elena tightened a fitting with precise torque before answering. "Some things can't be simulated. The way a mountain creates its own weather patterns. How an aircraft responds when pushed beyond its theoretical limits. The balance between what's possible and what's necessary when lives are at stake." She closed the access panel and wiped her hands on a cloth. "Those lessons only come from experience, from flying when others won't, from failing and adapting, from understanding that manuals are starting points, not absolute truth." Ryan absorbed this with surprising humility. "Could you teach that?" "Not just the techniques, but the understanding." Elena studied him for a moment, seeing past the privileged background and cocky exterior to something more substantial beneath, a genuine desire to learn, to improve, to become something better than he had been. "Some of it," she answered honestly. "The rest you'd have to learn yourself, by doing the work no one else wants, taking the missions others avoid, and being willing to fail until you get it right." He nodded slowly, a new determination forming behind his eyes. "I'd like to try, if you're willing." Before Elena could respond, the hangar door opened, admitting Mira Patel and Director Walsh. Their faces were grim, confirming what Elena had already suspected. The situation had deteriorated further. "We've lost contact with research team." "Bravo," Walsh announced without preamble. Their last check-in placed them at the Northern Observatory. They reported structural damage from the wind and were attempting to secure their equipment before evacuation. Elena set down her coffee. "And tools, timeline?" They missed their scheduled communication window 30 minutes ago. Patel explained, spreading a detailed map across a nearby workbench. The observatory is here, at 9,300 feet elevation on the North Ridge. In these conditions, if they're exposed, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone present understood the lethal mathematics of extreme cold and wind exposure. What about the other teams? Elena asked, already studying the map. Team Alpha confirmed safe at the eastern shelter, Walsh replied. Team Charlie reported they've secured themselves in the reinforced weather station at Westridge Point. They can hold out until the storm passes. Elena traced the route to the northern observatory, noting the terrain features and likely wind patterns. The path would be even more treacherous than the earlier rescue, with higher elevation and more complex topography creating unpredictable turbulence. I'll need 20 minutes to complete essential maintenance, then we can launch, she said decisively. We, Patel repeated, raising an eyebrow. You're still planning to fly this mission yourself? Elena looked up from the map. No one else at Summit Ridge is qualified to fly in these conditions. I meant, Patel clarified, that you've already completed one impossible rescue today. Protocol would dictate rest before attempting another high-risk operation. A faint smile touched Elena's lips. If we followed protocol, those climbers would still be freezing on that ledge. She turned back to the map. Time is critical. I'll need the most detailed weather data you have for the North Ridge, particularly wind shear patterns near the observatory. Walsh nodded to Patel, who immediately left to gather the requested information. He then turned to Ryan, who had been watching the exchange with intense focus. Blackwood, return to the secure wing. All non-essential personnel need to remain in protected areas while the storm peaks. Ryan straightened, something new in his posture, not the performative confidence of before, but a genuine resolve. Sir, I'd like to volunteer as support crew for this mission. Walsh's surprise was evident. This isn't a training exercise, Blackwood. This is about as real and dangerous as it gets. I understand that, sir, Ryan replied, his voice steady. But someone needs to monitor communications and coordinate with the medical team. I'm certified in both. Elena glanced up from her maintenance work, studying Ryan with new interest. His request wasn't about glory or recognition. Those motivations had been stripped away by the reality of what true rescue work entailed. This was something more fundamental, a desire to be useful, to contribute, to begin the journey from simulation to reality. After a moment's consideration, Walsh nodded. Report to the operations center and coordinate with Chief Garcia. Follow his instructions precisely. As Ryan left, Walsh turned back to Elena, who had already resumed her maintenance checks. Is there anything else you need for this mission? Elena tightened a final bolt and closed the access panel. Just one thing, she said, straightening to face him directly. When this is over, Summit Ridge needs to reevaluate its training programs. Real-world experience should be integrated with your simulation models, not dismissed when it contradicts them. Walsh held her gaze, then nodded once, not just acknowledgement, but commitment. I give you my word. 17 minutes later, Elena's helicopter was ready for launch. The storm had intensified further, wind speeds now consistently above 100 knots at higher elevations, with temperatures that would freeze exposed skin in seconds. Conditions that Summit Ridge's operational manuals classified simply as no flight possible. In the operations center, Ryan had established a communications relay system to maximize their chances of maintaining contact through the storm's interference. He worked with focused intensity, triple-checking frequencies and backup systems, all traces of his former arrogance replaced by determined professionalism. Patel approached Elena as she performed her pre-flight checks, extending a small device. We've modified our emergency locator beacons to boost signal strength, she explained. If the research team has lost their communications equipment, this Might help you find them. Elena accepted the device with a nod of thanks. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of understanding passing between them. Two women who had moved from adversaries to reluctant allies through the crucible of crisis. The observatory has a small helipad on the eastern side, Patel continued, indicating the location on a portable map. But in these winds. I won't be using it, Elena confirmed. Hover extraction only. The structure won't provide enough wind protection for a safe landing. Patel nodded, impressed by the matter-of-fact way Elena approached what most would consider impossible. The team consists of 3 researchers, Dr. Liang, the lead meteorologist, and 2 graduate students, Kowalski and Diaz. All have basic cold weather training, but they're scientists, not survival experts. Understood. Elena finished her inspection and turned toward the helicopter. Time to go. The launch was even more challenging than the previous mission. With crosswinds that slammed into the helicopter, the moment it lifted from the relative protection of the Summit Ridge compound. Elena fought for control, her hands dancing across the controls with the intuitive precision that came from years of flying in conditions that pushed aircraft to their absolute limits. The journey to the Northern Observatory became a battle against elements that seemed determined to deny passage to any human creation. Visibility dropped to near zero in swirling snow and ice, forcing Elena to rely entirely on her modified instrumentation and hard-earned knowledge of mountain weather patterns. The helicopter bucked and shuddered against forces that would have overwhelmed less experienced pilots. Yet Elena maintained control with a calm determination that bordered on supernatural. In the operations center, tension mounted as they tracked the helicopter's progress through increasingly intermittent signal returns. Ryan monitored the communications with intense focus, relaying crucial updates between Elena and the command team. Rescue 1, be advised, he transmitted as a new weather alert appeared on his screen. Satellite data shows intensified rotation, forming over your route. Wind speeds potentially exceeding 120 knots. Through static and interference, Elena's calm voice replied, "Copy that. Adjusting approach vector to utilize Eastern Ridge as wind buffer." Director Walsh, watching the data feeds with growing concern, leaned toward the microphone. "Ms. Vasquez, our models indicate conditions ahead are beyond survivable parameters. Consider aborting mission until the peak intensity passes." There was a moment of static before Elena's response came through, clear despite the storm's interference. "With respect, Director, your models have limitations. I've flown in worse." Continuing approach. The simple confidence in her statement silenced further objections. They could only watch as the small indicator representing her helicopter continued its seemingly impossible journey through the heart of the storm. As Elena approached the Northern Observatory, the full challenge of the rescue became apparent. The facility was perched on an exposed ridge, its weather monitoring equipment designed to capture the most extreme conditions, which it was now experiencing firsthand. Several of the external sensor arrays had been sheared away by the wind, and part of the main structure's roof had collapsed under the weight of accumulated ice and snow. Elena circled once, assessing the situation through brief glimpses when the swirling snow parted enough to allow visibility. The helipad Patel had mentioned was completely unusable, covered in debris from damaged equipment. The only approach would be from the western side, where a small observation deck offered minimal protection from the direct force of the wind. "Summit Ridge, this is Rescue 1, she transmitted. Visual contact established with the observatory. Significant structural damage observed. Proceeding with western approach for extraction." In the operations center, Patel leaned forward with concern. "The western side has no landing zone. It's just an observation platform." "She's not planning to land," Ryan realized aloud, a new understanding in his voice. "She's going to hold. I'll hover alongside the platform while extracting the team." Walsh shook his head in disbelief. In these winds? That's beyond what any helicopter is designed to handle. Beyond what any helicopter is designed to handle, Ryan repeated softly. But not beyond what she can make it do. On approach to the observatory, Elena focused entirely on the task at hand, her awareness extending beyond the cockpit to encompass every vibration and response of her aircraft as it fought against the storm. This wasn't flying as taught in manuals or simulators. This was a communion between pilot and machine, each pushing beyond normal limitations to accomplish something that theory said was impossible. The observatory appeared through the swirling snow, its damaged structure creaking visibly as wind hammered against the remaining walls. Elena could see movement inside, figures gesturing frantically through a partially shattered observation window. They had seen her approach, a miracle of hope in conditions that had promised only death. With exquisite precision, Elena maneuvered the helicopter alongside the western observation deck, fighting constant wind shear that threatened to slam the aircraft into the building or push it away into the void beyond the ridge. The distance to maintain was critical, close enough for the researchers to reach the helicopter, but far enough to avoid rotor strike against the building in unpredictable gusts. Inside the operations center, those watching held their breath. As the helicopter achieved what seemed impossible, a relatively stable hover mere meters from the damaged structure, in wind conditions that exceeded the operational parameters of any aircraft in production. "How is she doing that?" one of the technicians whispered, watching the feed with wide eyes. "Experience," Walsh answered quietly. "The kind you can't simulate." On the observatory deck, the three researchers emerged wearing what protective gear they had managed to salvage from their damaged equipment. They moved with the awkward urgency of people suffering from early hypothermia, their coordination already compromised by the cold. Elena opened the side door, the wind immediately howling through the cabin with renewed fury. Securing herself with a safety harness, she guided the first researcher aboard, Dr. Liang, the elderly meteorologist whose lifetime of studying extreme weather had nearly ended in becoming a victim of it. His hands were so stiffened by cold he could barely grip the safety handles, requiring Elena to practically lift him into the aircraft while simultaneously maintaining control of the helicopter through the pedals and one hand on the cyclic. The second researcher, Kowalski, was in better condition and managed to board with minimal assistance. As the third researcher, Diaz, prepared to make the crossing, disaster struck. A section of the observation deck, weakened by the relentless assault of the storm, gave way beneath her feet. She fell, catching herself at the last moment on the ragged edge of the remaining platform, her legs dangling over 1,000 foot. Drop into the storm-shrouded abyss below. Elena didn't hesitate. Securing her safety line, she moved to the very edge of the helicopter's door, extending herself outward while maintaining one hand on the aircraft controls. The helicopter drifted closer to the building, dangerously close, the rotor blades now mere feet from the structure in a maneuver that violated every safety protocol ever written. From the operations center, those watching could only see fragments of the situation through the intermittent video feed. What they did see left them speechless. Elena stretched between her helicopter and the damaged platform, one hand still on the controls, somehow maintaining the impossible hover while simultaneously reaching for the stranded researcher. "She can't do both," Patel whispered, understanding the impossible choice. Maintain control of the aircraft or save the researcher, but not both. Yet somehow, Elena did. With a strength born of absolute necessity, she caught Diaz's arm just as the researcher lost her grip on the crumbling platform. In one fluid motion that defied both physics and human limitation, she pulled the woman aboard while simultaneously adjusting the helicopter's position to avoid collision with the building. As a violent gust pushed them sideways, for a fraction of a second, disaster seemed certain. The main rotor appeared to be on a collision course with the observatory wall, a contact that would have been catastrophic for everyone involved. But Elena's hand moved across the controls. With intuitive precision, the helicopter responding as if it were an extension of her own body, banking away from the structure with inches to spare. "My God," Walsh breathed, watching the miracle unfold on the monitors. "That's not possible." "Apparently it is," Ryan replied, his voice filled with wonder and newfound understanding. "When you stop believing what you're told can't be done." With all three researchers aboard, Elena secured the side door and began the perilous journey back to Summit Ridge. The return flight was no less challenging than the approach, with the storm reaching peak intensity and the added weight of the passengers affecting the helicopter's handling in the turbulent conditions. Yet through it all, Elena maintained the same calm focus that had characterized her throughout both impossible rescues. This wasn't bravado or recklessness. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had pushed beyond conventional limitations so many times that she understood, better than any manual or simulator could teach, exactly what was truly possible, when necessity demanded it. As they approached Summit Ridge, the facility came into view through brief breaks in the swirling snow, a beacon of safety in the heart of the storm. The landing pad was illuminated with emergency lights, medical teams standing ready despite the punishing conditions. "Summit Ridge, this is Rescue 1, Elena transmitted. "Returning with 3 survivors, all requiring immediate medical attention for hypothermia and possible frostbite. Approaching for landing." "Copy, Rescue 1, Ryan's voice replied, steady and professional. "You are cleared for immediate approach." Medical team standing by. Wind advisory. Gusting to 85 knots at pad level with severe crosswind component. Elena acknowledged the information, though it hardly told her anything she couldn't already feel through the aircraft's responses. The landing would be challenging, perhaps the most difficult part of the entire operation, given the fatigue now beginning to affect even her exceptional endurance. The final approach became a masterclass in precision flying, with Elena counteracting vicious crosswinds that threatened to flip the helicopter at the most vulnerable moment of transition from flight to landing. Yet despite the conditions, despite the exhaustion, despite everything that said it shouldn't be possible, she brought the Bell 205 down with remarkable gentleness, the skids touching the ice-covered pad with barely a bump. The moment they landed, medical teams rushed forward, extracting the researchers and rushing them toward treatment. Elena performed a complete shutdown sequence, her movements still methodical despite having just completed her second impossible rescue in a single day. As she finally stepped from the helicopter into the howling wind, she found a welcoming committee unlike any she had experienced at Summit Ridge before. Director Walsh stood at the front, flanked by Mira Patel and, surprisingly, Ryan Blackwood. Behind them were gathered maintenance crews, instructors, and trainees, all standing at attention in the punishing conditions, a spontaneous honor guard for a pilot they had once dismissed but now viewed with awe. Walsh stepped forward, raising his voice to be heard over the storm. 6 lives saved today, Ms. Vasquez. 6 people who would have died without you, and he glanced at the battered Bell 205. Your extraordinary helicopter. Elena accepted his words with a simple nod, too physically drained for anything more. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the back-to-back rescues was fading, leaving behind bone-deep fatigue that even her exceptional stamina couldn't completely overcome. Ryan moved forward, offering support as she swayed slightly. "Let's get you inside," he said, no trace of his former arrogance in his voice. Only respect and genuine concern. As they made their way toward the facility entrance, the crowd parted. Respectfully, Elena noticed something surprising. Many of the maintenance crew and several instructors reached out to touch the fuselage of her helicopter as they passed, a gesture of appreciation and newfound respect for the aircraft they had once mocked as obsolete. Inside, the atmosphere had transformed completely from the dismissive environment Elena had first encountered. Medical staff nodded respectfully as she passed. Technicians who had previously ignored her now watched with undisguised admiration. Even the administrative personnel who had processed her restricted access credentials now seemed almost embarrassed by the memory. In the medical wing, the rescued researchers were already receiving treatment, their conditions stable thanks to the speed of the extraction. Dr. Liang, the senior meteorologist, reached out weakly as Elena passed his treatment bay. "They said no aircraft could fly in these conditions," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with wonder. "I've studied extreme weather my entire career, and I would have sworn it was impossible." Elena paused by his bedside. "The line between impossible and merely difficult is often just a matter of perspective," she replied quietly. "And sometimes what the manuals call impossible is simply what hasn't been attempted by someone willing to risk failure." The elderly scientist nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I'll remember that in my research going forward. Theory must always bow to observed reality, not the other way around." Elena continued to the briefing room, where Walsh had called an immediate meeting of senior staff. The large space was filled with Summit Ridge's leadership team, their faces showing a mixture of exhaustion from the ongoing crisis and something new, humility born from witnessing what they had all believed impossible. As Elena entered, the room fell silent, all eyes turning to the woman whose quiet competence had shattered their comfortable assumptions about what could and couldn't be done in extreme conditions. Walsh stood at the head of the table, his posture straight but lacking the rigidity of his former arrogance. "Ms. Vasquez, before we continue with emergency operations planning, I believe something needs to be said." He looked around the room, making eye contact with each member of his team. Summit Ridge has prided itself on having the most advanced training programs, the most sophisticated simulators, and the most current aircraft in the mountain rescue community. He paused, his expression solemn. "Today we learned that all of that means very little without the wisdom that comes from real experience. Ms. Vasquez and her," he smiled slightly, "vintage helicopter accomplished what all our advanced technology could not, because she understood something we had forgotten, that rescues aren't performed by equipment or systems, but by people willing to push beyond what manuals say is possible." Around the table, heads nodded in agreement, the lesson landing with particular impact because they had all witnessed it firsthand. "When this crisis passes," Walsh continued, "Summit Ridge will be implementing significant changes to our training protocols. Experience will be valued alongside technology. Real-world knowledge will be integrated with simulation data. And we will remember that sometimes the most valuable asset in a rescue operation isn't the newest equipment, but the wisdom to use whatever tools are available to their fullest potential." He turned to Elena, genuine respect in his eyes. "The storm is forecast to continue through tomorrow. We still have teams in the field, equipment to secure, and potentially more emergencies to handle. Summit Ridge would be honored if you would consider taking temporary command of our emergency operations until the crisis passes." The room remained silent, waiting for her response. It was an extraordinary offer, placing the elite facility under the leadership of a woman they had initially dismissed as irrelevant. Yet after what they had witnessed, not a single person present would question the decision. Elena looked around the room, seeing the genuine change in the faces that had once viewed her with dismissal or derision. Her gaze lingered briefly on Ryan, whose transformation seemed most profound, from entitled mockery to humble respect in the span of a single day. "I'll coordinate emergency operations," she agreed simply, "but with one condition." "Name it," Walsh replied immediately. "When this is over, Summit Ridge establishes a permanent position for an experience integration officer, someone whose job is to ensure that real-world knowledge is never again dismissed in favor of theoretical models or simulator data." Walsh didn't hesitate. Consider it done." Elena nodded, then turned to the situation maps displaying the ongoing crisis. Without further ceremony, she began outlining priorities and assigning responsibilities, her quiet authority filling the room as naturally as if she had always belonged there. And outside, secured against the howling storm, her helicopter waited, battered, patched, mismatched, and magnificent. No longer a target of mockery, but a symbol of something Summit Ridge had forgotten and was now relearning. That true capability isn't about appearance or age or conformity to expectations. It's about performance when it matters most, about rising to challenges that others deem impossible, and about the courage to fly when everyone else remains grounded by doubt. The storm raged on, but within Summit Ridge, something had fundamentally changed. A facility that had valued perfection over experience, theory over practice, appearance over substance, was beginning to understand that sometimes salvation comes not from the newest, shiniest solution, but from the weathered hands and determined heart of someone who simply refuses to accept that some things cannot be done. Dawn broke over Summit Ridge like a fragile promise, pale light filtering through clouds still heavy with the storm's lingering fury. The worst had passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape, buildings partially buried under snowdrifts, equipment encased in ice, and everywhere the evidence of nature's raw power etched across the facility that had once seemed so impervious to the elements. In the operations center, Elena stood by the main display, reviewing the latest satellite imagery with the focused attention of someone who had been awake for nearly 36 hours yet refused to yield to exhaustion. The crisis wasn't over. 2 maintenance vehicles remained stranded at the Eastern Weather Station. A communications relay tower had collapsed on the southern ridge, and reports of avalanche activity throughout the region suggested new dangers emerging in the storm's aftermath. "Status update on Team Charlie?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fatigue evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. Ryan Blackwood, who had remained at communications throughout the night, checked his display. "Still secure at Westridge. Point. Weather station reporting structural integrity at 92%. Power reserve stable. They're requesting evac once conditions permit." Elena nodded, making a note in her ever-present notebook. "Winds have dropped below 60 knots at their elevation. We'll schedule extraction within the next 3 hours if the trend continues." The operations center functioned with a new rhythm under Elena's guidance, more fluid, more adaptive, less bound by rigid protocols that failed to account for real-world conditions. Throughout the night, she had revised emergency procedures on the fly, combining Summit Ridge's advanced resources with practical approaches born from her years of experience. The result was a response operation that achieved what previously would have been deemed impossible under such conditions. Director Walsh entered, carrying fresh coffee for the team that had worked through the night. He looked exhausted but carried himself with a newfound humility that transformed his formerly rigid demeanor. "Maintenance reports the northern access. Road has been cleared enough for emergency vehicles," he announced, setting the coffee tray on a side table. "Medical evacuation for our rescued personnel can proceed by ground if necessary." "Good," Elena acknowledged. "But I want air transport readied as backup. The avalanche risk along the northern corridor is still significant." Walsh nodded without hesitation, a stark contrast to the dismissive attitude he would have shown towards such caution days earlier. "I'll have Patel prepare the H-160 and run the expanded risk assessment protocols you suggested." As Walsh moved away to relay the instructions, Ryan approached Elena with a tablet displaying the latest weather models. "The system is finally breaking up," he reported. "Forecasts indicate conditions will improve significantly over the next 12 hours. Elena studied the data, her experienced eye-catching nuances that standard analysis might miss. "The secondary front is weakening faster than expected. We may have a window for the Westridge extraction sooner than anticipated." Ryan nodded, making notes with a new attention to detail that reflected how much he had changed in a short time. Gone was the entitled cadet who mocked what he didn't understand. In his place stood a young man humbled by witnessing true expertise, eager to learn what no simulator could teach him. "I'd like to observe the extraction operation," he said, his tone respectful rather than demanding. "If that's acceptable." Elena regarded him thoughtfully. "Not just observe. You'll coordinate communications and assist with pre-flight planning. Real experience, not just watching from the sidelines." Surprise and gratitude flashed across his face. "Thank you. I won't let you down." "This isn't about me," Elena corrected gently. "It's about the people who need help and doing whatever it takes to provide that help effectively. Remember that, and you'll make the right decisions when it matters." As the morning progressed, the storm's grip on Summit Ridge continued to loosen. Maintenance crews ventured out to assess damage and begin critical repairs, while medical staff prepared the rescued personnel for eventual transport to more comprehensive facilities once conditions permitted. Elena used the improving weather to conduct a thorough inspection of her helicopter. Despite the punishing conditions it had endured during the 2 rescue missions, the Bell 205 had performed beyond what any engineering specifications would have predicted possible. Now, as she checked each system with methodical precision, she found remarkably little damage, a testament to both the aircraft's robust design and her meticulous maintenance over the years. Meera Patel joined her on the landing pad, her appreciation for Elena's aircraft now evident in the way she studied its systems with genuine interest rather than dismissal. "The anti-icing modifications on your main rotor," Patel observed, examining the custom installation. "I've never seen that configuration before." "Custom design," Elena explained, wiping ice from a connection point to check for stress fractures. "Developed after a rescue in the Yukon where standard systems failed at extreme temperatures. The heating elements are integrated with sensors that detect ice formation patterns and adjust power distribution accordingly." Patel shook her head in wonder. "And none of this is in any current technical manual or design specification." "Some lessons can't be learned from manuals," Elena replied, her hands never pausing in their work. "They come from necessity, from being caught in impossible situations and finding a way through. Like flying when everyone else says you can't," Patel said quietly. Elena nodded, moving to check the tail rotor assembly. "Exactly like that." They worked together for a time, Patel assisting with the inspection while absorbing Elena's practical knowledge with the humility of someone who recognized how much they still had to learn despite their advanced training. The dynamic between them had transformed completely, from skepticism and dismissal to genuine respect and eagerness to learn. As the sun climbed higher, burning through the lingering clouds, Summit Ridge slowly emerged from crisis mode. The final stranded team at Westridge Point was successfully extracted by Elena in an operation that, while challenging, lacked the near-impossible conditions of the previous day's rescues. Ryan performed admirably in his support role, demonstrating a newfound attention to detail and respect for procedures that incorporated practical experience alongside technical protocols. By late afternoon, as the facility settled into recovery operations, Director Walsh called Elena to his office. The space had changed subtly since her first summoning there, personal items now visible alongside the professional accolades, a humanizing touch that reflected Walsh's evolving perspective. "The access road has been fully cleared," he informed her as she entered. "Emergency services from Grayson County have arrived to assist with infrastructure repairs and medical transport." Elena nodded, settling into the chair he offered, a small courtesy he hadn't extended during their first meeting. "I've received communication from Northern Command regarding your assignment," Walsh continued, his expression thoughtful. "With the immediate crisis resolved, they're inquiring about your assessment of Summit Ridge and whether you wish to continue your evaluation or return to your regular posting. Elena studied him for a moment, measuring the genuine change she perceived against the possibility that crisis-induced humility might fade once normalcy returned. That depends on whether Summit Ridge is truly committed to integration of practical experience into its training programs, or if this has been a temporary adjustment due to extraordinary circumstances. Walsh didn't answer immediately, instead rising to look out the window at the activity on the landing pad below. Elena's helicopter sat alongside Summit Ridge's modern fleet, its weathered appearance now commanding a respect that no one would have imagined possible days earlier. "I've been director here for 7 years," Walsh said finally. "In that time, we've developed what I believed were the most advanced mountain rescue protocols in the world. Our simulators are state-of-the-art. Our aircraft are the latest models. Our training programs are based on thousands of data points collected from actual operations." He turned back to face her. "And yet, when faced with conditions that exceeded our model's parameters, all of that advanced technology was useless. It took your experience, and your trust in that experience, even when everyone else doubted, to save lives that would otherwise have been lost." He returned to his desk, his decision visibly forming. "Summit Ridge will be implementing comprehensive changes to our approach. Experience integration will become a cornerstone of our training, not an afterthought. Practical wisdom will be valued alongside theoretical knowledge. And most importantly, we will cultivate the humility to recognize that sometimes the most valuable innovations come from necessity in the field, not design in the laboratory." Elena nodded, satisfied with both his words and the conviction behind them. "In that case, I'd like to remain for the initial implementation phase. Northern Command can arrange for my official reassignment rather than maintaining the pretense of a transfer error." Relief showed clearly on Walsh's face. "I was hoping you'd say that. There's a generation of pilots here who could benefit enormously from your knowledge, if you're willing to share it." "On one condition," Elena replied. "My helicopter stays as is. No cosmetic upgrades, no unnecessary replacements to make. It look like it belongs. The patches and mismatched panels stay." Walsh looked momentarily surprised, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "As a reminder of what's really important." "Exactly," Elena confirmed. "Some lessons need visual reinforcement." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Ryan entered, his expression more serious and focused than Elena had ever seen it. "Excuse me, Director, Ms. Vasquez," he said respectfully. "The rescued climbers have been cleared for transport to Grayson Memorial Hospital. They're asking to speak with Ms. Vasquez before they leave." Elena rose, exchanging a nod with Walsh. That sealed their agreement. She followed Ryan through the facility, noting how differently the personnel now regarded her, not with dismissal or curiosity, but with genuine respect born from witnessing excellence that defied their expectations. In the medical wing, the 4 climbers were prepared for transport, their conditions stabilized but still requiring more comprehensive care than Summit Ridge's medical facilities could provide. As Elena entered, Dr. Liang, the elderly meteorologist, who had nearly lost his life studying the very conditions that had almost killed him, reached out a hand in greeting. "We wanted to thank you properly," he said, his voice stronger than the previous day. "The medical team told us what you did, how you flew in conditions that their manuals classified as unsurvivable." Elena took his offered hand. "I'm glad. You're recovering well." "It's more than that," one of the students, Diaz, interjected from her bed. "You showed us something important, something I think even Summit Ridge needed to learn." "What's that?" Elena asked. "That sometimes the most reliable solutions aren't the newest or the most sophisticated," Liang answered thoughtfully. "Sometimes they're the ones that have weathered storms before and carry the adaptations born from that experience." He smiled slightly. "Rather like your helicopter." Elena nodded, understanding the deeper wisdom in his observation. "The value isn't in the age or the appearance. she agreed. It's in the proven capability when it matters most. As the medical team arrived to transport the climbers, Leon had one final comment. I've studied weather systems my entire career, but I've always done it from behind reinforced windows and computer screens. You taught me that there's no substitute for direct experience, for feeling the wind and knowing in your bones what the instruments can only suggest. He squeezed her hand. I won't forget that lesson. After the climbers departed, Elena made her way back to the landing pad where her helicopter waited. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the facility, highlighting the contrast between her weathered Bell 205 and Summit Ridge's gleaming fleet. Yet something had changed in how the aircraft was perceived. Several maintenance crew members were examining it with genuine interest rather than derision, studying the custom modifications with newfound appreciation. Meera Patel stood nearby, reviewing maintenance logs on a tablet. She looked up as Elena approached. I've been studying the adaptations you've made to the standard Bell systems, she said. Some of them contradict everything in our technical manuals, but after seeing them perform in actual conditions, she shook her head in wonder. Our simulator programs need significant revision. Simulators have their place, Elena acknowledged. They're excellent for building basic skills and practicing standard procedures, but they can never fully capture the reality of flying in extreme conditions, the way an aircraft responds when pushed beyond its theoretical limits, the intuitive adjustments a pilot develops through actual experience. Patel nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to learn more about your approach. Not to replace our current methods, but to complement them, to fill the gaps we didn't even know existed until yesterday. That's exactly the integration Summit Ridge needs, Elena agreed. Combining the best of advanced technology with the wisdom that only comes from real-world experience. As they spoke, Ryan approached, accompanied by several other trainees. Their demeanor had transformed completely. The arrogance and mockery replaced by genuine eagerness to learn. Ms. Vasquez, Ryan began, we were wondering if you might be willing to share some insights about high-altitude rescue techniques that aren't covered in our standard training. Elena studied the group, seeing in their faces the potential for growth, for becoming not just technically proficient pilots, but truly exceptional rescuers who understood that sometimes the most important skills couldn't be taught in a classroom or simulator. Meet me here tomorrow morning, she decided. Dress for field conditions, not classroom comfort. The best lessons about mountain flying happen on the mountain, not behind a desk. Their expressions brightened with anticipation, even Ryan, who days earlier would have scoffed at the idea of learning anything from a pilot with a museum-piece helicopter. Now he nodded with genuine appreciation, understanding that he had been offered an opportunity more valuable than any simulator session could provide. As the group departed, Director Walsh approached, surveying the activity across the landing pad with satisfaction. Word of what happened here is spreading, he informed Elena. I've received calls from 3 other regional training centers asking about our experience integration program. Elena raised an eyebrow, a program that didn't exist 3 days ago, but will exist going forward, Walsh assured her. Starting with you sharing your knowledge with our instructors and trainees, and eventually expanding to bring in other experienced field operators whose practical wisdom might contradict our theoretical models, but whose results speak for themselves. He gestured toward her helicopter. That aircraft and your flying skills saved 6 lives that all our advanced technology couldn't reach. That's a lesson Summit Ridge won't forget. As sunset approached, Elena stood alone beside her helicopter, running her hand along the fuselage that bore the marks of countless missions. Each patch and repair telling the story of lives saved in conditions others deemed impossible. The dying light gleamed on the mismatched panels and weathered paint, transforming them from signs of age to badges of honor. From this vantage point, she could see across the entire Summit Ridge facility, the hangars housing the latest aircraft, The advanced training centers with their sophisticated simulators, the operations buildings with cutting-edge technology. All of it represented the best that modern innovation could offer, yet all of it had proven insufficient when faced with conditions that exceeded theoretical parameters. Her helicopter, dismissed as obsolete, had succeeded where the newest technology had failed, not because newer wasn't better in principle, but because experience had taught Elena that adaptation, ingenuity, and the courage to trust her own judgment were sometimes more valuable than the most advanced systems money could buy. As she completed her evening maintenance routine, she became aware of a presence behind her. Turning, she found Ryan standing a respectful distance away, his expression thoughtful in the fading light. "Something on your mind?" she asked, continuing her work. He stepped closer, his gaze moving over the helicopter with new appreciation. "I keep thinking about yesterday, about how everyone, myself included, laughed at this aircraft. We called it a fossil, a museum piece, a flying junkyard." He shook his head, embarrassment and wonder mingling in his expression. "And then, it became our only hope, the only way out for those people." Elena nodded, understanding the profound realization he was processing. It's an easy mistake to make, confusing new with better, confusing appearance with capability. What matters isn't how something looks or when it was built, but whether it can do what needs to be done when failure isn't an option. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us,